The Dreamcast. A console that I still don't own. Look, I didn't buy a Genesis for this project. Why would I buy a Dreamcast? The fourth home console Sega released, and the last, as the company left the console industry only a couple years after it launched. Despite its failure, the Dreamcast was arguably the most influential console the company made, if for no other reason than the fact that it had built-in online capability. The console is also a big cult classic, with tons of fans for it and its original software to this day. Crazy Taxi, Shenmue, Jet Set Radio, Space Channel 5, and Samba de Amigo, even the Typing of the Dead. Thankfully, while the console was discontinued in 2001, most of the games released for it have been made playable on other later systems. And this includes the bestseller, American launch title, and premier 3D Sonic game, Big's Big Fishing Journey. Sonic Adventure, also known as Sonic Adventure 1, and later re-released as Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut. The first full 3D game in the franchise, the fifth or sixth game in the main series, and the only game ever where you have to fish for a frog in the same level where you drive the bumper car and traverse a hall of mirrors. Released in 1998 in Japan and 1999 outside, the game has been re-released a few different times over the decades. I played the GameCube version of Sonic Adventure DX for this review, released in June 2003, but a similar version was released for PC between late 2003 and 2004. In September 2010, an HD downloadable version of it came out for Xbox 360 and PS3, with the same engine and style as DX, but with the additional content from that version separated as DLC. This version was brought over to Steam in March 2011, except in Japan, where it was released in 2024. Because of reasons, I'm sure. That additional content, for the record, includes an exploration-based mission mode, unlockable Game Gear titles, and the ultimate unlockable character of Metal Sonic. I didn't explore any of the DX content for this playthrough, though I recall really liking mission mode in the past, and I did unlock a couple Game Gear entries. In general, the biggest change that affected my playthrough is different textures, new character models, and a higher frame rate. Not that it helped much. After Sonic & Knuckles' release, series lead Yuji Naka left STI in America to return to Japan, leaving the remaining STI developers to work on the main Sonic game for the console after the Genesis, the Sega Saturn. This game was Sonic Extreme, and it doesn't exist. There's some interesting history behind the game, including Naka refusing to let them use the engine Sonic Team developed for Nights into Dreams, but the long and short of it is that Extreme was probably always doomed, and because of all this, the only Sonic games for the Saturn were a game compilation with a hub world, a port of Sonic 3D Blast, and none of which could exactly be considered core titles in the series. After Sonic Team finished messing around with whatever the hell Nights into Dreams was, the game's designer Takashi Iizuka proposed, hey, maybe we should actually release games for our company's mascot, instead of just telling the LEGO game guys to pick up our slack. Thus, he pitched a new kind of Sonic title, an RPG. Maybe I should have better sources for my Sonic research than the Wikipedia development section. Okay, I think what that means is just a more character and story-based video game, which Adventure technically is. Maybe it was a translation issue, or Iizuka just didn't have the words he was looking for. The main source on Wikipedia doesn't have a link, and the source I did find was a 240p interview re-uploaded in 2022 with less than 60 views, with another copy from 2015 split into multiple parts. I feel like, given it's called a director's commentary, it should be somewhere in the game, presumably DX, given it talks about that port, but it's not in the GameCube version, and if it's in the Steam version, it needs to be unlocked somehow. And also, he doesn't explain what he meant beyond it being a simple RPG, and that apparently eventually became Sonic Adventure, so was he originally intending to make an RPG like we think of RPGs today? Is it just a language issue? What did he mean? Also, in the next section of that interview, he talks about the work that went into developing the camera system, which just feels like a bad idea given how it turned out. Well, regardless, Iizuka became director of Sonic Adventure, and Naka was producer. They designed stages to take these in time to complete, redesigned pre-existing characters for the new hardware, and brought in jingle writer from Sonic 3, Junsen No, to serve as the game's main composer. It was originally going to be a launch title for the Dreamcast, and outside of Japan it was. However, a delay led to it being released a month after the console in that country. It was a commercial success, selling 2.5 million copies by 2006. It also received great reviews, with the visual presentation in particular being seen as a highlight. The gameplay was also generally praised, though the game's audio received more mixed reviews and the game's camera system was pretty unpopular. There were also the glitches, which were a big problem. The Japanese version in particular was apparently so buggy that some of Sonic Team actually went to the US so that the North American localization would be patched. Though even today people will argue about how successful that patch job was. So generally positive reviews, but with some problems that got poked at. Not the best sign given the praise the previous games got. Well, guess there's nothing to do except play it for myself. I'm gonna have a lot more to say with a 3D game from the Genesis ones, so let's start with the presentation. If there's one thing I can say is unambiguously good about Sonic Adventure, it's the soundtrack. Sonic 2 may have started the trend of Sonic games having impeccable music, but it was Sonic Adventure that proved no matter how bad the game is, the OST is going to be absolute fire. Admittedly, a couple of the character songs are really cheesy, and the event sadness track is so melodramatic it's hilarious, but for the most part, these songs are absolute bops. I think the level music in particular is great. While the stages aren't broken up into acts anymore, they do have distinct subsections, and those subsections all get their own tracks. But they aren't completely disconnected, instead usually being based on the same musical motif and theme, with more drastic changes in the music for the bigger changes in the levels. There's a reason Jun Sano has had at least some role in almost every mainline Sonic game since, be it lead composer, sound supervision, or just working on one or two of the vocal tracks. I mean, of course he's a musical genius. This is the mind behind Crush 40. You think Johnny Gioli is going to work with an amateur? As for the rest of the sound design, that's where we start to go off the rails a bit. The sound effects aren't terrible, to be fair, though they are mostly either based on or outright taken from the 2D Sonic games. Interestingly, we return to the Speed Shoes have their own unique theme idea from CD, though given we're now working with live recorded music, I guess just speeding up the backing track wouldn't have worked quite as well as with Genesis MIDIs. Wait, is that why CD did that? However, with this game having more of a focus on story and a decent number of cutscenes, we also have to look at the voice acting as part of the sound design, and
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
I wonder what happened to Sonic.
Yeah. Look, I don't want to bash the voice cast. A few of the actors returned for later games and did a great job there, specifically Ryan Drummond, Jennifer Doolard, and Dean Bristow. Also, the guy playing Tails, Corey Bringus, was literally a child, being 12 to 13 while voicing him, and it's not like his brother Connor or his replacement William Corkery did significantly better with the character. Okay, why did Sega insist on literal children to voice Tails? I get he's young, but Corkery was 8 when he had the role. If there's anyone I blame for the voice acting here, it's the vocal directors, Lanny Minella and Bobby White. Interestingly, they're credited as post-recording directors in the places I could find, which probably doesn't mean what I think it does, but if it does, then it honestly kind of explains a lot. Oh, poor John St. John. First this and then Duke Nukem Forever. The poor man could not catch a break there. Well, how about the other side of the coin for presentation, the graphics? Well, as mentioned, I played the DX version of the game, which infamously changed up the graphics a lot. On one hand, changing the character models to be more in line with Adventure 2 does make sense, given this version released just a year or two after that game. The radical changes in lighting, texture replacements, and significantly worse water in the first stage, less so. There's also how the models move, especially when talking.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
I don't know where in the pipeline this lip syncing came in, but given there were complaints about the lip sync even for the original, I'm pretty sure it's not a DX issue. Also unclear is the pop-in, which may have been made worse by the GameCube port, or might have always just been really obvious. The odd thing is, the general graphics within the stages look pretty decent. I like a lot of the level themes especially. It's not a terrible looking game overall, it's just odd. I don't know, maybe I would have preferred the Dreamcast version, maybe not. Hard to say, honestly. There are also apparently glitches that were added into the DX version somehow. Thankfully I didn't run into too many myself, but that is worth being aware of if you play the game yourself. If you get the Steam version, it's generally recommended you get the better SADX mod along with it, since it fixes various issues and comes with several other mods based on previous versions. Though, even with all those changes, it's still Sonic Adventure. You might have noticed I haven't talked about the plot or story thus far. Unlike the previous games in this series, Sonic Adventure actually puts a significant amount of effort into the writing. Not only are there full cutscenes, both in-engine and pre-rendered, but the whole game is split into 7 different campaigns you can play through, 6 featuring different player characters going through the overall plot, and 1 final Supersonic campaign which acts as the true final boss for the game. This trend would be continued in different ways for future games, though the way Adventure in particular tells its stories is odd. Over the course of the game, the 6 characters cross over and meet each other at various points, dipping in and out of each other's storylines for different periods. For example, Tails is alongside Sonic for the majority of his campaign, even playing 4 of Sonic's levels alongside him. Meanwhile, Big the Cat, one of the characters introduced in this game, only briefly runs into Sonic right before the Chaos 6 boss fight and has only a sparse few encounters with any other characters. This also means several characters share cutscenes and sequences with each other, especially Prower. However, the cutscenes have different dialogue and outcomes depending on which character you're playing as. It's sort of like Rashomon, but if one of the characters in Rashomon was a fisherman whose pet ate the murder weapon. Which admittedly would make for an interesting twist in an adaptation. The overall plot can only really be pieced together through playing all 7 campaigns, and it is kind of wild. Really lore-breaking too, at least for the various adaptations of the Sonic franchise that came before it. The lore established in Sonic Adventure basically throws everything out of whack, especially for any adaptations that refuse to acknowledge the name Eggman. The basic version is this. Some 1,000 years ago, there was an ancient tribe of echidnas who were, I guess, supposed to be Mayan. They were led by an elderly echidna named Pachacamac, who's, kind of a douchebag. Also, shout out to Sonic Retro, a generally reliable and helpful archive site for Sonic that I've used a lot over the course of this project, and will probably continue to. There where I found English translations for the Japanese Genesis manuals, which was really helpful. But I would like to point out, as Levi Church did in his edit of the Sonic Adventure page, the plot synopsis given for this game is absolutely fucking buck wild. The section starts off with 2 whole paragraphs about Pachacamac's backstory, most of which is supported by exactly 2 lines of dialogue in-game mentioning his mother. From there, there's so much about the ancient past section of this game, which is so much bigger than the actual game provides. It's not entirely unfounded, but there are some details that feel like a big leap from what's actually established, like his mother teaching people to live in harmony with nature. Okay. Also, one more note, why exactly did they choose to name the clan the Knuckles Clan? Eventually, Pachacamac's daughter, Tikal, explored the nearby shrine, which housed the 7 Chaos Emeralds and the Master Emerald, as well as several creatures known as Chow. They were all guarded by a supernatural being known as Chaos, who was apparently surprisingly gentle. Then Pachacamac decides to do a conquering on the shrine, and warriors of the tribe stomp all over the baby Chow. So Chaos does something by absorbing the power of the Chaos Emeralds, which kills almost all the echidnas. However, Tikal manages to seal the monster away within the Master Emerald, along with her own spirit. So, why are the only important characters in the past named after South American archaeological sites? Seems like an odd pull for a 3D platformer. Thousands of years later, Eggman travels to Angel Island and maybe breaks the Master Emerald? It's actually not clear. We see his ship approaching the island at the start of Knuckles' story, and he captures and uses Chaos directly after this, but he doesn't actually land on the island, and we don't see any projectile hitting the emerald, but maybe that's just because Knuckles didn't see it. There's some implication that maybe Chaos shattered it from inside, but it's not clear how or why he would do that, and in general, the whole thing is just kind of unexplained. I'm not even sure how Eggman discovered Chaos beyond the mention of stone tablets, which I guess he found in the Mystic Ruins since his base is there, and the Echidna Ruins level Lost World is full of his robots, but also everywhere in the game is full of his robots, including locations that seem to have no connection to him like Casinopolis, and ow, I think my brain is starting to hurt. Look, I'm a Zelda fan and a Kirby fan. Overthinking the random lore implications is just kind of what I do. It's like my default state. I think I might need to work on that if I want to make it through this franchise with my sanity intact. Well, sanity. The rest of the plot is tied into the storylines of each individual character, so I think we should start talking about these chuckle fucks and their gameplay. The first campaign you have to play, and the central storyline the others are built around, is Sonic's. Makes sense, it is his name on the box. Along with a flat-out lie on the back. Have y'all seen this thing? Back of the box says we have over 30 massive levels, which is just like straight-up false advertising. There are 11 levels in the game total. The only way to get even 20 is by double counting them. Sure, you play through the levels multiple times as multiple different characters, but that's like saying Sonic 3 actually has 18 zones because you can play them as Sonic, Tails, or Sonic and Tails. Look, I know this version came out over 2 decades ago, but I feel like this was the lawsuit waiting to happen, assuming any of the kids who bought it had a lawyer for a parent. I was supposed to be talking about the Sonic campaign, wasn't I? The story here is interesting. Sonic's primary motivation through most of the game is stopping Eggman, though he's also basically Chaos's primary opponent. It's an odd dynamic. Sonic is the most focused on stopping Eggman's plots, but he also isn't privy to the more detailed parts of his plots. He's the most dedicated to defeating Chaos, but he doesn't even see half of Chaos's transformations, and he only sees a single scene from Chaos's backstory at the end of the penultimate level. He also arguably spends the most time getting sidelined by the other characters' storylines, like having a fight with Knuckles despite having no clue what the fuck Knuckles is even talking about, or the fight with Gamma that ends once Amy reveals what Gamma's role actually is. He also gets wrapped up with Amy for a few levels despite seemingly not wanting to. It all leaves his storyline feeling kind of unfocused and all over the place, to the point where the final boss fight against Eggman feels almost arbitrary. It's at least kind of cool that Eggman actually feels like a credible threat who Sonic treats with some degree of seriousness. A shame that in all of Eggman's boss fights, he just reuses voice lines from the cutscenes ad nauseum. That's also a problem with the character fights, infamously.
Oh no!
Sonic's campaign is easily the longest of all the characters, having 10 stages, while all the others have 5 at most. He also has 2 minigames, 5 boss fights, and an absolutely ass camera system. Look, I get it, this is the first Sonic game to even have a camera system, and no franchise outside of Kirby has nailed the 3D camera on their first go. But my lord, when one of the first NPCs you can talk to in the entire game basically says, yeah, sometimes the camera is going to screw you over, you'll just get used to it, it's probably not a great sign for things to come. In any case, after our first Chaos boss fight, where you collect rings in the cutscene just so new players don't instantly die, we dive into our first action stage, Emerald Coast, where we realize this game is going to be as cool as it is poorly made. In general, I think the levels in this game are actually pretty impressive stylistically. Emerald Coast has plenty of memorable set pieces, Windy Valley has a tornado that you get caught up in, Casinopolis is just a fun idea for a challenge, Ice Cap might literally be the zone from Sonic 3 given the snowboard, Twinkle Park has a weird mix of platforming and minigames that kinda works for me, Speed Highway is just a genuinely really cool level, Red Mountain has the most open first section in the game, Skydeck looks cool at least, Lost World has fun sequences and actual puzzles, and Final Egg feels super climactic and difficult without tipping over into annoying. Even the Hot Shelter, the one level Sonic doesn't play through, feels interesting when you get to it, if only for how differently it plays from the other levels. Well, that all sounds like this is shaping up to be an excellent game. What's the catch? God, Sonic plays like ass. Ah, there it is. Okay, just to get this out of the way, the loading zones feel like the loading sequences from Sonic CD, the game is fairly glitchy, and for some reason the story mode missions in each stage is called Level C for some reason. Just assume that applies to every campaign in the game, and let's move on to Sonic's problems. Sonic Adventure introduces the homing attack to the Hedgehog's moveset, a move which allows Sonic to hit enemies automatically. If there isn't a target nearby, he'll just dash forward in the air, which is a decent way of gaining speed quickly. The first problem comes from having absolutely no idea what you're targeting with a homing attack at any given moment. In theory, it targets the closest enemy or item, but in practice, the way it prioritizes targets feels almost random. Or sometimes it just doesn't target anything at all, which is also fun. It wouldn't be until Sonic Unleashed for the main series to tell the player what they're actually targeting before they attack. We also have the Spin Dash returning from the last few games, which in a 3D space feels almost uncontrollable. However, also new to this game are upgrades, which allow characters to get new moves in their arsenal. For Sonic, this comes in the form of the Lightspeed Dash, a move that you have to charge up to dash through a line of rings. The charge time makes the move so damn situational, it's basically not worth using except for the moments it's required. Not that it would even be reliable enough to use when it isn't required. Or when it is required, frankly. There's also the fact that a lot of the stages just aren't that fun to play through with Sonic. Emerald Coast feels awkward since you struggle to move in a straight line. The multiple routes of Windy Valley and Red Mountain don't work as well when it's hard to tell where you even are in a level. Pinball physics in Casinopolis are just ass. Ice Cap and Twinkle Park are so easy to fall down and lose all progress in. Lost World has the goddamn wall panel segment that just doesn't want to work with the controls. Skydeck is just absolutely garbage for Sonic the whole way through, and my god, Sky Chase is not that fun in this game. Why do we have to do it 4 goddamn times? Also, every one of Sonic's boss fights either feels frustratingly slow and monotonous to get through, like Chaos 4 and the Egg Viper, or like a complete Joker design, like the Egg Hornet and Chaos 6. And the character fights are some of the easiest across the whole game, which is funny considering there are only like 6. No joke, I basically rage quit Sonic's story on my first day of playing. I went to go eat lunch instead. Then I ended up throwing up after that meal, so that was just a bad day in general. And when I finally beat Sonic's story, I was legitimately tempted to just say, hey, I technically beat the game, that's it, let's wrap it up here. I obviously didn't, I played the other campaigns, but the fact I was tempted not to after Sonic's probably tells you all you need to know about the quality there. Technically, after you finish Sonic's first level, you can already swap over to another campaign. You unlock even more as you go through the game based on what characters you've met, so once you finish Sonic's stories, you can play any campaign you want next. However, the ring of characters has an order, so next up we have Tails. Technically, you can play as Tails in certain stages of Sonic's story with a second controller, similar to the co-op in Sonic 2 and 3, though why you would try escapes me. Like I said, Tails' story mostly runs alongside Sonic's, with the only breaks being after the first sky chase repeats the second, and the end of the campaign. Otherwise, it's basically just Tails going through the exact same plot as Sonic, except now Eggman sounds like he smoked a pack. This is probably the story where the whole Rashomon thing is most prominent, since Tails fights multiple fights Sonic did originally, and Eggman is a lot less comedic in his vocal delivery. It's honestly weird. Tails' character arc is about learning to be independent, to not rely so much on Sonic doing everything for him, but from the start of the campaign, Tails is already fighting the bosses himself and beating Sonic in the races. Not that I don't understand having imposter syndrome, of course. The story is also even less focused on the overall plot, with a grand total of one fight against Chaos, and it ends with Eggman trying and failing to set off a nuke in Station Square. A plot point which does not fit the previously established tone of his plans, and yet somehow is the plot point most directly referenced in the sequel. This series is weird. Tails' levels are all about racing to the end, usually against Sonic. As such, his levels are probably the shortest in the full game. They only ever use one section of the stage, and since your whole goal is getting to the end before your opponent can, the levels can be over in a little over a minute. Add to that Tails' campaign only being 5 stages long, and his campaign is the first to feel really insubstantial. Though to be fair, that's kind of just a problem with all the non-Sonic campaigns in this game. They have these ideas they explore that some people might really enjoy, but then it's over in less time than it takes to beat 2 Sonic levels. To make up for how short Tails' levels can be, he gets a whopping 3 different required minigames. He does Sky Chase both times Sonic does it, and in between he goes snowboarding down Sand Hill. Again, I think this was intended to make the campaign seem more substantial, but really all it does is put into focus how little of the campaign is actually spent on the supposed focus of racing through levels. Also, these mini-games aren't particularly fun, I'm just gonna be honest. I like the funny snowboarding, it was cool in Ice Cap, but there aren't any ramps to trick off of here, and the whole thing is basically just a scoring minigame. Yeah, this game has a score system in place, and I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't do a lot. For the sub-games at least, getting a high enough score will net you an additional emblem, but for the main stages, it doesn't really do anything. Later games would have a ranking at the end of the stage, which could give you bonus rewards if you got A ranks or S ranks, but here? If there is a ranking system in place, it's not accessible in the main story, so you'd have to replay the levels multiple times for the points to matter even slightly. It's an odd system all around, honestly. One thing I will say for Tails' campaign is I actually really like how he plays. I think he runs out of flight stamina a little too fast, unfortunately, but otherwise, it's a lot of fun flying around and swinging your tails around. It's actually kind of a shame, honestly. This is the makings of a really fun game, but it's over almost before you know it, and then Tails doesn't get his own 3D campaign again, ever. Oh well, at least without future appearances, we can't have the weird time paradox of him finding required upgrades in the ancient past. Seriously, what's the deal with the ancient past sequences? Are they visions Tikal is showing people, or are the characters actually going back in time? Do I need to use the time travel gag again this early? Because I will do it if I have to, I swear to God, I have the resources. Next up, we have Knuckles, who's probably the most involved in the overarching plot. He's around for Chaos and Tikal being released from the Master Emerald. He fights Chaos just as many times as Sonic, with those being all his boss fights, and he even gets pulled into the past a whopping 3 times. Considering he starts off his campaign talking about how he doesn't know why exactly he's been given the job to defend the Master Emerald, it makes a lot of sense for him to see more of the ancient echidnas and Chaos' descent into, well, chaos. Perhaps to make up for all this, his actual goals in the story are probably the least connected of everyone's. He just wants to put the Master Emerald back together. Yeah, apparently when that thing broke, it exploded into like 15 pieces and scattered across miles. Seriously, even ignoring how 6 pieces somehow ended up inside closed-off buildings, they're somehow all over Station Square and the Mystic Ruins and even aboard Eggman's ship. He only even attacks Sonic and Tails because Eggman tricks him into thinking they've taken pieces of the Master Emerald themselves. And Knuckles is not beating the brainless allegations even this early in the series. He even went after Eggman just because he saw him holding something shiny, which, like, he makes robots. He's probably gonna hold shiny shit sometimes. And at least he can punch unlike the other characters, so when it comes time to fight, he can just straight up knock his opponents the fuck out. Knuckles' gameplay is based around treasure hunting down the shards of the Master Emerald with a little proximity radar at the bottom of the screen. As such, he ends up exploring some of the more open level segments in the game, though honestly not that open. Don't get me wrong, each of the levels he explores are non-linear enough to be worth exploring, but outside of maybe Red Mountain, none of them are really big enough to be a challenge to explore. In general, you can pretty much always find where the pieces are just by gliding from one edge of the map to the other, and it's not even that difficult to do so. It makes these levels a lot easier than they otherwise could be, which is honestly kind of a shame. Knuckles is honestly an interesting character to control, with his gliding, climbing, and even digging making him play differently from every other character. But being limited to only stages that Sonic played through limits what he can go through, which really is disappointing. I know general consensus is that the Adventure 2 version of the treasure hunting gameplay is worse than the Adventure 1 version, but I really hope that's been overblown because I honestly feel like there's so much room to improve on this formula. I like how I say I hope the gameplay in Adventure 2 is good, like that isn't one of the games I've already played to death in the past. Anyways, next campaign is Amy's, and... yeah, I've got nothing. That's literally the only interesting part of her story, and it kinda sucks. Seriously, Amy's levels just feel like Sonic's levels, but slower, worse, and with a robot constantly chasing her. Her story is basically just Tails' arc, except with a baby bird and implied sexual harassment, and her controls are so bad it ruined her for the entire Advance trilogy. She was the worst character to play as in those games, and you know I'm right. Their campaign is also the shortest, with a grand total of 3 stages and 1 boss fight, so there's generally not much to talk about anyways. The only really noteworthy part is she sees half an inch of chaos emerging in a past sequence, and she apparently has TV ADHD and completely missed Eggman trying to nuke the city. Regardless, we move on to our next character, the most infamous part of this game. Some have called him the killer of Sonic, the scourge of the Dreamcast, the worst decision Sonic team ever made. He's made voice actors into laughingstocks, dragged down the reputation of the whole series, and even become the biggest joke of the entire Sonic franchise. He is, of course, the infamous E102 Gamma. What? Gamma's the next character. You unlock him next after Amy. Yes, obviously this is the game where Big the Cat was introduced and got its own dedicated campaign. Everyone makes jokes about it. I've made my own fair share in this review already. However, the thing is, I don't actually think Big's campaign is all that bad. Oh, shut up, you're a stock audio audience. I can make you have even worse opinions. Watch. Ocarina of Time is overrated. See? For the record, I do understand why the idea was so repellent. The whole appeal of Sonic as a franchise is high-speed, frantic action platforming. Even Amy's campaign encourages you to run so you can escape the bad touch robot. So a mode where you sit down and fish for a frog isn't exactly what most people were hoping for here. Especially not one where the fishing controls are kind of wonky and poorly explained, and the main character is one more vocal mannerism or physical tick from being cancelled as an ableist caricature. Yeah, the plot here is weird. The whole thing only kicks off because a part of Chaos ended up split off from the rest, and Big's pet frog somehow got possessed by it. Specifically, he was possessed by Chaos's prehensile tail, which really is only important because in the boss fight after he regains that tail, he uses it to attack Sonic and Knuckles. Then Froggy eats Big's lucky charm, which is a Chaos Emerald somehow, and just runs away. And from there, Big just sort of bumbles his way around the world, trying to catch Froggy and accidentally bumping into other characters in the hub worlds. Which is at least an interesting use for the hub world, because otherwise it's mostly just upgrade hunting and getting lost. Yeah, the hub worlds are an interesting idea, and there is fun to be had messing around in Station Square, messing with the plastic old man and drowning in the hotel pool. But the Mystic Ruins are a small plaza connected to 2 straight lines and a jungle maze, and the egg carrier is literally just the top of a big airship and a couple rooms inside of it. I do like some of the ideas, like having to change the egg carrier yourself, or how after the egg carrier crashes, it essentially becomes an island. There is value there. But for the most part, it's just a few connecting areas between levels, and unless you're religiously activating the Tikal hint orbs, you probably won't even know where you're supposed to go half the time. Aside from bothering the actual heroes, Big's main activity in the hub worlds is hunting down upgrades. Every character has at least one required upgrade, usually placed in the way of the critical path, except Tails, who finds a constant spinning attack badge in the ancient past. For Big, this takes the form of an inner tube, which makes him just about the only Sonic character who can actually move through water reasonably. However, each character also has optional upgrades. Most of them have one: a longer hammer for Amy, faster flying for Tails, quicker light dash charging times for Sonic. Big, meanwhile, has 5. To be fair, 4 of those are lure upgrades, which make him able to catch bigger fish, but that's still 6 upgrades total for him, when even Sonic only has 3. One of the lure upgrades is even inside a level, under the water of Ice Cap. The levels themselves are surprisingly in-depth too. Tinkle Park is the first and simplest, basically just being a single pool that you fish in without any upgrades, but after that, the stages are all open for exploration, with secrets and different kinds of fish, and as mentioned, they even hide one of the optional upgrades in the level. Yeah, they put a lot of work into big stages, surprisingly. You even get a completely unique section of Emerald Coast, Sonic's starting level, to explore all by himself. It's interesting. The developers clearly wanted Big's campaign to be fun and engaging, and outside of a few glitches and collision which can be frustrating, the fishing itself is actually pretty well balanced. It's not the easiest thing in the world, and you do have to pay close attention to the tension meter or risk losing a life when the line breaks, but it's honestly not as bad as a lot of people say it is. If you want a tip, from Ice Cap onwards, you should be fishing from the water itself rather than on the land. This makes it quicker to pull your catch to you and reduces the chances of those collision glitches I mentioned. In general, the gameplay isn't that bad, all things considered. I don't think that's why people have an issue with it, honestly. I think people have an issue with it because it's a decent, if slightly wonky, fishing campaign in the middle of their high-speed Sonic game. The thing is, I think it does kind of work if you look at the whole picture. There are only 4 levels in the mode, and the boss fight at the end is so pathetically easy it's basically just a cutscene. And while you can fish for all different kinds of fish, trying to get a high score and bring home a big meal for seafood tonight, you can just as easily ignore everything in the campaign except the life belt and just catch Froggy. He's usually near the start of each level, and if he isn't, he's not far enough away to be difficult to find. The most involved levels get, if you're just doing what's required, is a bit of platforming and enemy avoiding at the start of Hot Shelter. The whole campaign feels even more like a momentary diversion than the others, and it almost hits the chord the developers probably wanted, a slow-paced moment to relax in between the more hectic and difficult campaigns of the other characters. The problem is they didn't frame it as a short minigame or a momentary diversion. This isn't a sub-game like Sky Chase or Sand Hill. This is a full story mode required campaign given the same weight on the character select menu as any of the others. That means it's going to fall under the same scrutiny as the other campaigns, and however fun I found the minigame, it's undeniably not what people came to this game looking for. There's a reason why fishing as a mechanic in these games didn't return for literal decades, and when it did, it was a completely optional minigame that was quicker, easier, and less involved. I enjoyed the campaign for what it was, arguably more than I did with Amy's, but I also came into this playthrough fully knowing what I was getting into and how to play the game. For someone back in '98 when this first came out, I can absolutely understand why this would be as off-putting and unwelcome as it was treated. It's just not a good choice for one of the main campaigns. But hey, at the very least we can laugh at the bumbling of Big's storyline and the surprisingly catchy character song. Yeah, for some reason they made a duet between the fat purple cat and his fat frog an actual jam. I don't know why. At last, we get to our penultimate campaign with E102, also known as Gamma. This is one of the more well-regarded stories in the game, and I can understand why. The whole thing starts with Eggman awakening his brand new sentient robot, the second in his E100 series. Like all of Eggman's robots before Heroes, Gamma is powered by a small animal housed inside him, and now it's being weaponized to hunt down and kill various things. Although, even before we inevitably turn on our creator like we're in Frankenstein, the only enemies we actually shoot are just Eggman's robots and a few training dummies. But eventually we do turn on him after a heartfelt meeting with Amy and her birdie companion, and Gamma's mission becomes to free his fellow E100 series robots. Or, more accurately, free the animals trapped inside them. It's a surprisingly emotional story, considering so many of the characters are robots without facial expressions. Or maybe it's because they don't have facial expressions.
Ah!
It certainly helps that Gamma stages are actually fun to play through. It's basically a 3D running gun with a time limit to keep you on your toes. Apparently the whole reason he was included was because Sonic Team felt compelled to include gun combat and didn't feel like it was right to give a gun to any of the Anthro characters. Insert obligatory Shadow the Hedgehog joke here. Wait, did I not finish this script? The core gameplay loop of Gamma's stages is based around aiming at surrounding enemies to rack up combos. You can target a ton of enemies at once by holding down the action button and release to shoot off a barrage of missiles. Sort of like the Sky Chase minigame, except instead of being on rails and moving around the screen, you have full platforming controls, including a hover upgrade. And you'll want to get good combos because Gamma's campaign is the only one with timed levels. Yes, technically Tails has to worry about losing his races, but there it's just a matter of getting over the rubber banding AI. Gamma has a full timer on screen at all times, and the only way to get more time is by blasting chains of enemies. It's almost shockingly fun, and the levels manage to keep up the pace even better than a lot of Sonic's levels. Gamma also has a ton of boss fights, as 3 of his 5 levels end with a duel against one of the E100 robots. He even has 2 boss fights outside of levels with his older brother Beta and a fight against Sonic when their paths converge. It's all super cathartic, which is exactly what I'm looking for in a game like this. It might be my favorite campaign in the game, even more so than Sonic's.
And yes, I know I'm part of the problem for Tails levels in Adventure 2. I've never claimed my decisions are good in the long run. I mean, I'm a YouTuber and a musician. I live on bad decision making.
Finally, after you beat all 6 character campaigns, you unlock the 7th and final story, Super Sonic. This takes place after the other stories and begins with Eggman getting ambushed and attacked by Chaos and the watery bastard stealing the Chaos Emeralds from Knuckles.
Oh yeah, Knuckles picked up and kept the Chaos Emeralds Chaos had absorbed over the plot after beating Chaos 6. Look, this game has a lot of shit in it, and this review is already, 30 minutes at least?
After Sonic and Tails learn of Chaos's return, Sonic finally goes back to see the incident we described 5,000 words ago, where Chaos commits biblical genocide. Call steals Chaos and the Master Emerald. We learn that characters sent into the past look like they're just hardcore dissociating, and then Chaos steals the final Chaos Emerald from the plane Tails built that big crash near his house. Again, I can't cover every absurd plot point as they happen. This was supposed to be a medium-length review. So Chaos becomes perfect Chaos, destroys Station Square, and Sonic argues with Call about restorative justice and the inefficacy of imprisonment. Big the Cat jump scare! Apparently the Chaos Emeralds have both negative and positive energy in them, and Chaos only used the negative energy. So Sonic's friends and people who've never actually spoken more than a sentence to him cheer him into becoming Super Sonic for one final battle against Chaos.
And that final battle is... cool. I like the ending here.
Admittedly, I remember seriously struggling against Perfect Chaos as a kid, but given I'm now 25 years old and playing video games is more or less my job, I didn't really have any issues with it this time around. At most, I got hit once in the second phase, and I backtracked to hit a speed booster so I would have enough speed to land the blow on him, but that's about the worst of it. Despite arguably being a bit too easy, though, it's a genuinely epic feeling final boss. The music helps a lot, of course. You could play Open Your Heart over the goddamn Wrecking Ball fight and it would feel like a battle to determine the fate of humanity. And while the Phase 2 music isn't anywhere near as good, it does make the situation seem incredibly dire. But I also think just the idea of the fight works well. Racing across the water, collecting rings so you don't run out of time before stopping him, running over ramps and speed boosters, also you can dash straight through Chaos and explode out of his head. It's all incredible. I love it so much.
After that, Chaos finally sees the young Chow he was defending all those millennia ago are still around to the present day, living at peace with modern people. Tikal brings him to... heaven, maybe? Or maybe they go back into the Master Emerald, but willingly? I don't know, it's kind of unclear, and I don't think either of them ever appear again canonically. It's a very sweet ending regardless, and as Tails says...
all's well that ends well, right?
Okay, just because everyone's expecting the joke.
This city is fucking destroyed!
And that was Sonic Adventure, and wow, that was a lot. Sorry, I didn't intend for this to be more than twice the length of the Genesis games. I knew the 3D entries would be longer to talk about than the 2D ones, but this was longer than even I was expecting. Luckily, this is the only game in the series with 6 full, completely separate campaigns, so the later reviews will probably be a bit more to the point than this. Unless y'all really like me rambling for over half an hour. But as for my thoughts on Sonic Adventure as a whole, in an actually digestible form,
Look, Sonic Adventure is not perfect, nor is it irredeemable. The stages are well put together in theme, but they all have sections that just aren't fun to play through. Some of the characters are really fun to play as in a 3D space, and others feel clunky and unentertaining. The hub levels are a great idea and allow for exploration and secret hunting, but it can make it frustratingly obtuse where you're supposed to go. It really feels like for every high, there's a low, every pro a con, every blasting enemies is gamma, stupid fucking minigame. And yet, despite all the problems, I came away from the game as a whole feeling oddly warm about it. Part of that may be nostalgia, of course. I've had this copy of the game since I was a little kid, and it along with Adventure 2 basically introduced me to Sonic as a whole. But I do think there is genuine value to be found in this game, even if it hasn't always aged the best.
really? That's the Sonic series in a nutshell to me. It has some terrific highs and regrettable lows, and as time has gone on, it's only become more of a laughingstock. But despite that, it's still always going to hold a special place in my heart, because there is still so much that it does right. Sonic Adventure may be a hot mess, but god damn it, it's my hot mess. And I don't think that's ever gonna change. Okay, just one more time.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
Classic. Wait, shit, I forgot the Chow Guard!